So we are going to stream this on Facebook and on Zoom and on YouTube. But if you are watching on, okay, so we are going to stream. I'm not going to listen to myself. But if you are watching on Facebook, that's great. But you won't be able to interact unless you also happen to be on Zoom. Okay. And we are ready to go. Shalom, shalom, everyone. Welcome to the Crash Course in Jewish Art. Okay, so we're going to say hello to Blair. Hi, Blair. Welcome. Welcome, David. Nice to see you.
Rabbi. Nice to see you.
You know, the shadows are very Rembrandt-like. I love it.
You know, I'm not sure that it's intended. I haven't, I think I need some lighting people to help me here, but I'm glad you like it.
So, I like it. It's like very Rembrandt-like. I would say hello to Aryeh Graham, all the way from Albany. Olivia, nice to see you back, Olivia. Yisrael Wallach, welcome. Hi, Vlad. Vlad is always up for more knowledge. We'll say hello to Veronica and hello to Allison. So we've got all sorts of people watching. And like I mentioned last week, this was sort of a shot in the dark to see whether there's genuine interest in Jewish art as a subject. Well, I'm going to take one more moment and lift this up a little bit higher. Okay, there we go. I think that's going to be good. There we go. Okay, excellent. So we started speaking last week. Actually, we asked some of the folks over here how many of you are artists or art aficionados, and we actually went into, I guess, art as an investment, why there aren't any Jewish artists before the 1850s, and what happened with the acceleration of the Jewish different genres of art within Jewish art, simply because the Jewish people try to catch up to the rest of the world, and therefore they very quickly went through the different styles, different schools of art. And because of that, we don't have a large volume of any one school. And that sort of rebounded about 20, 25, 30, not even 30 years ago, it's not true, about 20 years ago, probably tops, where people woke up and they said, look, I can't afford Isidor Kaufman. I can't afford Moritz Oppenheim. I don't have that kind of money, but I don't want to buy a print. I want actual art that takes skill and that a person worked on. And for a lot of people, you know, I never judge when it comes to art. Everyone has their own style, but some say, I want my art to look like there was a lot of effort. And because of that, the new artists came about and they began to cover each school of Jewish art. And that's where we are today. So first off, I want to speak about today, what is Jewish art? What makes art Jewish? Not an easy question. Let me give you a few possibilities. Possibility number one is that the artist was Jewish. And if the artist was Jewish, hey, it's Jewish art. Now, it's a little, to me, that's a little bit of a tortured description or definition, only because if that's the case, then I'm Dreaming of a White Christmas is a Jewish song, because it's composed by Irving Berlin, right? That's not the very fact that the person composing something, right? And Emma Lazarus was Jewish, so of course she's dressed very modestly, Our Lady Liberty, but I don't think anyone would say that that's a Jewish statue if there is such a thing. So, but even so, places like the Israel Museum do consider that Jewish art, and they will put artists as Jewish artists, even though the subject may be not Jewish at all. The subjects may even be Christian subjects. Thank you so much. Interestingly enough, one of the great shtetl artists was Marc Chagall, and Marc Chagall also painted some Christian paintings, including their supposed Lord and Savior, right? There are paintings of him. Of course, he's green in the painting, but no accounting for maybe he had a bad bowl of cholent. I don't know. So that's one kind of art. One kind of art is the artist is Jewish. And once you use that definition, what you'll even find is that there are some art that's called Jewish, where the Jewish artist wouldn't even be halachically Jewish. Not meaning the father Jewish, the mother wasn't Jewish, so he is Jewish origin. A good example of that would be Modigliani, who they actually made a film about. Very interesting person, but his dad was Jewish, mom was not. Okay, that's one definition of Jewish artist. The other definition of Jewish art is the subject matter is Jewish. Now, if that would be called Jewish art, then what I started off saying at the beginning of the class, that Jewish art began in the 1850s, is not quite so, because there were Jewish subjects. For example, Rembrandt painted rabbis, and there were others also who were hired by the Jewish nobility to paint them, and perhaps that's Jewish, perhaps not. Again, there's no right or wrong here. I'm just giving you the definitions. Third kind of art, biblical art. So is that Jewish? The scenes are from the Bible. So, of course, Christianity believes in what they call the Old Testament, we call the Torah, and many of the artists painted scenes from that. So would you call that Jewish art because it's our Jewish Torah or paintings of our Jewish Torah? Now, I'm going to tell you parenthetically, we don't, in general, paint faces of Torah personalities. We don't do that. Rarely will you find a Jewish artist, especially one who is more on the religious side, who will paint Moses's face. We don't do that. There's different reasons, but one of them is that there's an understanding in Judaism that we really don't understand these personalities. We don't. They were so great. They were so holy. And the word face in Hebrew, anyone know how to say face in Hebrew? If we want to make this a little interactive, how do you say a face in Hebrew? And I'll give you a little hint. If you have a bubby and she gave you a pinch in the cheek, she said, you have a shena
Panim.
Panim. A shena panim. So it's panim. Panim means face. Now, where does the word face come from? Panim comes from the Hebrew word hygiene. It comes from the word panim, which means inside. The panim is panim. So when I paint someone's face, I'm really saying that I understand them integrally. I understand them personally. And there's no way that we can say that we understand Moses. It doesn't happen. So in general, we don't paint biblical paintings. We don't paint Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov. We don't do that. So you're not going to really find a lot of Jewish art, biblical art, that depicts biblical characters. They're almost always painted by Christians. There are rare exceptions. I have in my house a painting of the Mount Sinai. It's an awesome, frightening painting, as it were. I commissioned it by the artist. He was one of the new artists who were able to paint like Kaufman, and his name is Boris Dubrov. We're going to speak more about him in the last class. We're going to introduce you to these kind of contemporary stars who are able to accomplish similar to what they did 150 years ago. But when I commissioned that painting, I told him, please don't paint Moshe, don't paint Moses. And not only didn't he paint Moses, but even the Jewish people, you don't really see the faces. So maybe that's Jewish art, biblical imagery. Okay. It's an interesting question. So now, once we struggle to find Jewish art, let's find some other niche within Jewish art. Okay, ready for this? Ready to get complicated? Israeli art. Okay, Israeli art. Now, anyone here ever been to Israel? Raise your hand. Been to Israel? Graham's coming with me, right, Graham? That's right. Okay, so Olivia, you want to come to Israel with me? That's right. Okay, good. We'll have a whole art trip. And by the way, Israel is. I have to tell you, people don't appreciate. Hi, how are you, Rachel? Welcome, Ben.
Hi.
Our 2 stars.
Sure.
Welcome, guys. Welcome. Speaking of Israel, Ben came with me to Israel, and God willing, Rachel.
Great experience. You should all go with Rabbi Klotzko.
Oh, you're the best, Ben. Thank you. So Israel. 1 second, Ben. Didn't you negotiate a painting for me?
I did negotiate a painting for you.
Oh, that's right. This guy's a superstar on the making. So we're going to be sharing some stories today. So speaking of biblical paintings, I have a collection of art, and there was one image that I really wanted. It's a simple image. I wanted an image of Noah's Ark in the flood. It's a dramatic. A lot of people have seascape paintings called seascapes where you have water, but that painting of Noah, and I didn't want it to be cheesy, so that makes it extra hard. And we found in a gallery in Tzvat a painting by an artist that I happen to collect, one of his early works. He's changed his style dramatically, and his early works are very desirable. And this gallery didn't have it hanging. He had it in his attic. And he saw I wasn't satisfied with what he had in his gallery. So he took me up to the attic, and I said, oh, Noah's Ark. I wanted a Noah's Ark. But then he saw I got too excited. So again, these are little hints we're giving you. Don't look excited, because art doesn't really have a price. It's like whatever your face reflects, that's the price. It's one of a kind. So I sort of blew it by looking exciting. And he asked for the moon. And I tried to get him down, and no. So I had this group of students with me, and I knew I had a secret weapon on the trip. His name is Ben Francis. I met him in Michigan University, right? That's Ben right there, shaking his head with the tzahal. We actually met. I was in a coffee shop, and I don't know why I turned around. I met this guy, and I don't know what. I just said, look, I'm giving a class tonight. I see you're Jewish. You should come. And Ben came, and we became fast friends, like coffee shops. They're awesome, right, Ben?
Just like that. It was Besheret.
That's right. Anyhow, so I said, Ben, go get him. And Ben went. It took him like a half an hour. And then the whole group waited. Poor guys, waited. And then Ben comes out victorious with the painting. He won exactly the price I wanted.
I actually got it underpriced.
Yeah, underpriced.
I got it underpriced.
Baruch Hashem. So now I'm way off track, but it was worth it, because we had a living witness here to the passion of art. So Israeli art. Some think Jewish art is equal to Israeli art, and Israeli art is equal to Jewish art. So I'm going to give you another set of categories, and this is for those who really want to understand Jewish art. Okay, here we go. Jewish art will be divided into the following categories. Israeli art. Israeli art is one category of art. Now, what makes art Israeli? What makes art Israeli was actually a devastatingly difficult question to answer. When when Theodor Herzl spoke about Zionism, and he spoke about perhaps creating this Jewish state, Israel, a place for the Jewish people, he said, every state, every country has its culture. It's the way it reflects itself, both in music and in its national flag and in its art. So Herzl said, what makes art Israeli? Now, there was no official Israel. Israel always was. Palestine was what it was called by the Romans to stick it to the Jews. But let's just be honest, it was always Eretz Yisrael, and it always will be, period. So what makes art Israeli art? So they didn't know what to do with that. So they called a fellow from Europe who had come to Israel, and the little story over here. And his name was Boris Schatz. And Boris Schat said, okay, we're going to start a school and we're going to get teachers who will teach Israeli art. And he ended up getting artists from Europe to teach in Israel. Among the prestigious ones, for example, was somebody named Abel Pan, P-A-N-N. Right, or P-A-A-N, you'll look it up, Abel Pan. And these artists began to teach art in Israel. But what ended up happening was that it wasn't so much Israeli art, but it was European art taught in Israel. And people just weren't feeling that it was Israeli art. And it actually did not go up in value for many years. Now, recently, that early art did go up in value, nothing crazy, but 10, 15 grand, stuff like that. So I would say the first, or one of the first, one can argue, but one of the first Israeli artists who actually created what we call today Israeli art is an artist by the name of Reuven Rubin. Now that sounds like the same name twice, one in Hebrew, one in English. And the answer is, yeah, that's what it is. Reuven Rubin. That shouldn't be so surprising because there's a very important Jewish American artist. We're going to talk about Jewish American art soon, whose name was Ben Ben. B-E-N-B-N-N. Anyways, so Reuven Rubin, he had an image of what Israeli art should look like. Now, I did prepare some slides. I didn't prepare Reuven Rubin, so I'm going to take one moment. I'm sorry for all those who are watching on Facebook, but this is going to take just one moment. Reuven Rubin, spelled a few different ways, but we'll do our best. Okay, Reuven Rubin. And Reuven Rubin is, practically speaking, the first, I would say, Jewish Israeli artist. And I'm going to share this screen with, well, I'm not going to because a pop-up just popped up, but we'll do it over here. There we go. That's good enough. Pinterest. And we'll just show you what it looks like so you have a good feeling of, because this really defined Israeli art for a long time. This is Reuven Rubin. Okay, do you see that over there? Let's see if we can get that Pinterest. Okay, you can't see much.
That is gorgeous. Sorry.
Yeah, isn't that nice? This is more, it almost dreamy homage to Jerusalem, right? This kind of art, very dreamy, very beautiful. And that was Reuven Rubin. Reuven Rubin. And today, a large Reuven Rubin, a large one could go for $100,000 to $300,000. Now that would be cool if you went to Tzvat as a tourist. If you 30 years ago, 40 years ago, and you paid $1,000 for it, it could be worth $200,000 today. So no one really has gone up as much as Reuven Rubin. There are other artists that were original Israeli artists. Anna Ticho is another one. She was a female artist. Many artists like that. That's Israeli art. And technically, you don't have to be Jewish to paint Israeli art, but you do have to live in Israel. Okay, that's one kind of art. Next category, we're going to do this a little bit more military style because a lot of ground to cover. Israeli art. Go to Israel, you buy Israeli art. Wonderful. And it's pretty noticeable what Israeli art is, original Israeli art. Then there's American Jewish art. American Jewish art is quite interesting because the American Jewish artists, and I happen to have a special affinity towards American Jewish art. A lot of those artists who became well-known were also well-known in the secular and non-Jewish, Sean? Okay, yeah, it's too noisy. They were also known in the non-Jewish world. So a lot of those artists actually were union people. They were like early socialists, a lot of the artists, and their art spoke to the common person, the common worker, and it spread rapidly and spread all around. And a lot of that art has a certain realism to it. One of my favorite artists is a man by the name of Emmanuel Shari. Emmanuel Shari, S-C-H-A-R-Y, Emmanuel Shari. A beautiful, beautiful artist. You can get his prints. You'll almost never get his originals. And I'm very happy. I've been hunting his original for years. And I think I have the largest collection of original paintings of Emmanuel Shari. They vary in price, but there's very little of it out there. And he lived in, South Plains or somewhere, buried in New Jersey. You could find his grave. I found it once in a Google search. That was one of them. There were many others that were like that. Tully Filmus, although he's originally Russian, but he painted in America. One of my favorites is an artist by the name of Saul Raskin, also known as Shaul Raskin, but S-A-U-L, Saul Raskin, A-R-A-R-A-S-K-N. So Saul Raskin, he wasn't just an American. Many of these people were not born in America, by the way. They're born in Europe, but they grew up in America. And his art, he wasn't just an artist, but he was an advocate for Jewish art. And he would lecture all across the country. And there are a lot of books and printed stuff of his. And it's got a special genre. And some of them have a sort of a Norman Rockwellian feeling to them, which was very popular in those days, but Jewish. Emmanuel Shari used to be called the Jewish Norman Rockwell. You'll see him called online. So that's American Jewish art. Then there's the European Jewish art. And the European Jewish art, most of it is pre-war, and a lot of it is really strong Jewish imagery. Now, I have to mention this. Originally, it was very unpopular for Jewish artists after emancipation, when Jews began being let into salons. It was very unpopular to paint Jewish subjects. It was like, now that they're letting into society, you're going to go and paint rabbis. So they used to avoid painting anything Jewish. It's very interesting. However, that did change. And Chagall gets some credit, but he's not the first and he's not the only one, began finding beauty in the Jewish narrative, to the point that even non-Jews like Salvador Dali painted some Jewish subjects, which is fascinating. So it's European art, and there's not much of it, unfortunately, after the war. And then we're going to mention one more kind of art, or two more kinds of art. One is called Russian art. Now, Russian art deserves its own category because Russians are very technically proficient. They're well-trained, and a lot of the Russian art is startlingly beautiful. It just looks beautiful. And a lot of the big artists in Israel today are Russian trained, and Boris Dubrov, who I mentioned before, Boris Shapiro, anyone named Boris, that's a Russian, or Igor or Oleg or any of these, they're all Jew, they're all Russian. And in general, they're beautiful, and they also hold their value. They do very well with their value. And then the last kind of art that I'm going to mention tonight is called Holocaust art. Now, Holocaust art is an interesting subject. When I first heard people collect imagery of the Holocaust, it didn't bother me, but I thought, why? Like, how are you going to hang that on the wall? But as time went on, I actually did begin to appreciate Holocaust art. I understood that art is not just smiling rabbis or the Western Wall. Art is the story of our people. And unfortunately, the story of our people involves a significant amount of pain. And if we want to be real with it and not in denial, then we will sing songs about it. There'll be mournful songs, but that's part of the fabric of our history. And so will the art. And as time went on, I gathered together a pretty significant collection of Holocaust art. I had a piece that was actually painted on either it was a sheet or a article of clothing that was in the concentration camps, and the artist painted them coming back from a long day work. One of the most startling pieces that I got was an entire notebook that was painted, that was drawn in Theresienstadt, which was a concentration camp that was a duplicitous camp, because it was the camp that the Nazis let the Red Cross into. So there were two parts of the camp. One part is where they murdered people, and the other part was the face of the camp, where they had little children playing with balls as if it was a kindergarten. And that's the part they let the Red Cross into. So there was little bits of art that was painted there. There was even a book that was drawn there, a very famous book. It came out many years ago, but I remember it impacted me, a book of drawing by children from the Holocaust, and it was called I Never Saw Another Butterfly. It's okay if you've never heard about that book, but it's worth Googling, I Never Saw Another Butterfly. Oddly enough, many years after that book came out, a few months ago, they put up for auction all those drawings from that book. I didn't, it was going for a lot of money. I didn't bother, but the innocence, I Never Saw Another Butterfly, was very, very touching. And there were some major sculptures made out of that. What makes something Holocaust art? And I'm going to finish with that. Then we've got some cool stories to share with you. What makes something Holocaust art? That is a big question unto itself. I was telling you about the notebook. I ended up bidding on this notebook. The whole notebook was drawn in Theresienstadt, and each page was a depiction of a person who was in the camp. There was a really accomplished artist. And on the bottom, it would say the name of the person, when they died, and perhaps even how they died. And page by page, paint drawn in the camp. Most of them were pencil drawings. There were a few watercolors. There was one watercolor of the actual camp. There was one random watercolor of boats on the water, but all the rest were camp related. And what made this like heart-wrenching is that in the front page or front cover was a photograph of the artist, and the artist had circled herself. It was a lady, circled herself together with her family. And on the back cover of this book, I should have pulled it up. It's in my computer, but I'd have to find it. But the back cover, she had found a piece of Adolf Hitler's stationery when he was still a private in World War I. He had stationery, and it said on it, Privat's Adolf Hitler, when he was a nobody. He still was a nobody, he just became a wicked nobody. And she had the top half with his letterhead on it with Adolf Hitler. And she wrote in Hebrew, and yet we overcame her, and yet we survived. She wrote in Hebrew. And on the bottom was a piece also of Himmler. I think it was a stamp of Himmler's. Just a crazy, crazy book. And that was something that I was very proud to own. So there were a few of these articles. And what makes them Holocaust? So I'll give you a few different definitions. Either, number one, it's painted or drawn between, let's say, 39 and 45. So it would be a Holocaust painting. Or number two, it is painted or drawn by someone who went through the Holocaust, in which case it could have been drawn in 1963, but it's called a Holocaust painting because it went through the Holocaust. Or its subject matter is a Holocaust subject matter. So I actually have one painting painted by an Indian guru. I have this painting. It's the most horrific painting. And it was this Indian guru who knew very, very little about Judaism. Somebody introduced him to the horrors of the Holocaust. And he was sort of an amateur, like a naive artist. And he painted this very naive depiction of a concentration camp, of a death camp, with Jews hanging and the fire pits where the bodies were burned and Jews waiting online to go to the gas chambers. And this is by an Indian guru. Look him up, like totally out of the blue, but it's a startlingly real, raw painting. Okay. Now let's get into some stories, and I think you're going to enjoy this. Now, I'm going to tell you something that is somewhat troubling. We want, me as a rabbi, of course I want, but I think we all want to connect to Judaism. And just because something is art, or just because someone's an artist, doesn't mean they shouldn't connect to Judaism. You could be a Jewish artist and do Shabbat and kosher and so on. It's not a contradiction. But like I mentioned earlier, Jews were not allowed to be artists. And when they were allowed in, not only did they not want to paint Jewish subjects, religious subjects, but many of them used art as a gateway to leave traditional Judaism. Many of them. It was a phenomena, a difficult phenomena. And what ended up happening was many of those artists who grew up religious, perhaps like a Chagall, but there's many others, grew up as religious people. They lost their Judaism, and then to reminisce, to, nostalgically, they took those feelings and put it to canvas, almost like it's a memory of yesteryear. That's not me anymore, but look how quaint, how whimsical. It's just it was an interesting thing. Now, today, it's a little bit the opposite. And one of the people who gets credit for it is the Rebbe from Chabad, who actually encouraged artists to develop. I'm not a Chabad person, but he definitely did many great things. And one of the things he did that he deserves tremendous credit for is he encouraged people's artistry. So if they were an artist, he would say, so develop that. If they were a singer, so develop that. So, but in those days, it wasn't like that. So I'm going to tell you a story. And I have 3 stories to tell you. Story number 1. There was a city in Poland called Kazimierz. Now, Kazimierz was right near the city of Krakow. It was a small, very impoverished city. There were people who were artists, and they lived there, and it became a little bit of an artist colony as well. But in general, it was a very poor town. Now, there was a man by the name of Saul Silverstein. And Saul Silverstein lived in America. Saul Silverstein, he was not a religious or practicing Jew, but he was he was proud, and he looked at America as the future and Europe as the past. This was before the war. And he decided, he had read a lot of things from Shalom Aleichem and from Echad Ha'am. These are famous Yiddish Jewish authors. And he decided he's going to go to Europe and document the shtetl before there's no more shtetl left. And he's going and he's documenting them, and he's writing about them. He's going to make a book, and he ends up in Kazimierz. And as he's there, he ends up ripping his shoe on one of the cobblestone rock stones that were on the street, and he couldn't walk around with the sole of his shoe not attached. So he said, is there actually a cobbler? Is there a shoemaker in this small town? They said, yeah. There's a man by the name of Shalom Goldberg. Shalom Goldberg. So he goes to Shalom Goldberg and he says, I'd love my shoe to be fixed. And he said, sure, sit down, but it's going to take me a while. This is pretty messed up. So have a seat. Now, Shalom Goldberg lived in a very, very small little house. As a matter of fact, in that house was his cobbler shop, his shoe repair shop. And in that same room, because the house was basically one room, there was the shop, there was the kitchen, there was his bed, there were the kids' bed, there was everything in one room. They had little curtains. It was a very, very impoverished way of living. So Saul is like looking around as he's waiting for his shoe to be fixed. And wow, how quaint, how primitive. And then he looks at the wall and he sees there are these drawings on the wall. And he says, wow, who made these? These are outstanding. These are really special. And he says, oh, my son made them. His name is Heim Goldberg. So I said, wow, where is he? He said, oh, he paints houses now. But he painted these drawings? He says, yeah, well, I'd love to meet your son. So he's not going to be home till the end of the day, says the father, Shalom Goldberg. And Saul says, I'm going to wait around if that's okay with you. And he waits all day for Chaim Goldberg to come back. Little Chaim is 11, 12 years old. He comes back, and Saul, the American, says, are these yours? Did you really draw these, paint these? He said, yeah. He said, show me. So right away, he begins to draw. It's really fascinating. He begins to draw, and Saul is very impressed. And Saul ends up schmoozing with this little boy all night. And he says, you don't belong in Casimir's. You need to go to France. You need to go to Austria. You need to go to where the salons are. You need proper training. You've got a real talent. He says, so little Chaim says, my father's never going to let me go. Leave it up to me, says Saul. Saul turns to Shalom Goldberg, the father, and says, look, you're living in a very, very, very poor lifestyle here. I can help your son make money. He can become wealthy. He has a real talent. Can you trust me with him? I will bring him to France. I will allow him to, I will enroll him in a school, in an art school, and he will be exhibited in the salons. And for whatever reason, Shalom Goldberg agreed. Now, when we look at that today, we say, that's crazy. Why in the world did you let your 11, 12-year-old kid go off with a stranger? But people were so poor in those days. They felt like their kids would be doomed to that same lifestyle. So he let his son go. And the son traveled with Saul Silverstein all the way to France. And as they were going, the boy Chaim is drawing in this notebook. And he has these pictures of shtetl life and klezmers dancing and all those wonderful, cute images. So he goes to the art school, and he says to the director, to the educator, I'd like to enroll this boy in your art school. And the director, the educator, looks at him and says, no, this is a place for fine people, for people who are going to succeed in art. Look at him, he's ragtag, this is a street kid. So Saul said, listen, I know what I'm talking about. Test this kid out. So instead of giving him something to draw, this director gives him some plaster and says, what can you do with this? I'm going to leave the room. Take as much time as you need, and let's see what you could do. And with his hands, little Chaim Goldberg creates a bust of his sister's head. Amazing. The director comes in and says, did you do that? You're in. You are in. And Chaim Goldberg was enrolled in this school. Meanwhile, a very fascinating footnote, very fascinating. This man, Saul Silverstein, he was friendly with somebody from France by the name of Mr. Marc Chagall. So he makes an appointment. He goes to Marc Chagall's flat, and he says, I really want to show you what this kid can do. I just found this kid in Poland. Kazimierz, I should have mentioned, is in Poland. He says, I want to show you what this kid can do. And he shows Marc Chagall. Now, just for those of you that really don't know art, I don't know why you would be in this group if you never heard of Marc Chagall, but Marc Chagall is perhaps the most famous Jewish artist in history, certainly in modern history, and his larger pieces can go for many millions of dollars, millions, right? As a matter of fact, there are so many forgeries that you can't even sell one unless it's been approved by Comité de Chagall. And if they think that what you're presenting is a forgery, then they reserve the right to destroy it. So you're not even going to get it back. And you could be sure sometimes they were wrong. I'm convinced, or sometimes they ripped up real Marc Chagall. Chagall is a big deal, right? The windows on the Hadassah in Kerem in Israel. Chagall windows. You can Google that. Stunning, gorgeous. He shows this notebook to Mr. Marc Chagall, and Marc Chagall is blown away. Now, Marc Chagall had not painted shtetl paintings in the past. History says, and this used to be on Wikipedia, that Marc Chagall was influenced by this notebook and this boy to start painting shtetl paintings. So talk about Chaim Goldberg having a ripple effect in the art world, because today that's exactly what Chagall is known for, and he was inspired by this boy. Anyways, to make this story, to wrap up this story, Shalom Goldberg went on to become a very proficient artist, an amazing artist. He ended up meeting his wife in a concentration camp where he ended up, and he did survive the war, and he got married, and he had a few children, and ultimately he passed away. I have to check, maybe 2006 or so. His paintings hang in all the major museums, from the Met to the Smithsonian. And it's interesting that some of these artists with very Jewish sounding names, like Chaim Goldberg and Chaim Gross, who we mentioned last week, are actually featured. Chaim Goldberg sounds so Jewish. Anyhow, so that's Chaim Goldberg. Why am I telling you this story? So when I learned about Chaim Goldberg, I actually collected some of his art. And there was a museum in Chicago called the Spertus Museum that had a number of very interesting pieces. And I ended up with a very beautiful, large Chaim Goldberg. They were clearing up some room, and they just had too much inventory. And I was able to get it certainly on the, I don't want to use the word cheap, but sort of. So I was very, very proud. It was a beautiful painting. One day I get a call. The call comes from a man by the name of Shalom Goldberg. And I said, Shalom Goldberg, who are you? He says, well, my dad was Chaim Goldberg. He named me after his dad, Shalom Goldberg. And I'm going around making a book of all my father's paintings. And I hear you have one of his more important paintings. Can I come to your home and see it? I said, I'd be honored to. The son of Chaim Goldberg going to come and check out his dad's painting. Amazing. I said, come tomorrow. Now, this happened on Sukkot. And Sukkot, the holiday when we sit in the sukkah. So the day before the last 2 days of the holiday is a very special day. It's known as Hoshana Rabbah. It's a very special day. This is not the class to go into it, but it's part of the Sukkot holiday. It's also the last day to do teshuvah, to repent. It's like considered an extension of Yom Kippur. So the prayers are extra long that day. And then I inherited a custom from my father. And the custom is that after the long prayer on Hoshana Rabbah morning on Sukkot, we went to the deli and we would buy huge mounds of different cold cuts, corned beef, pastrami, salami, smoked turkey. We get ourselves some delicious Jewish rye or pumpernickel. You get some nice ground mustard. And that became the custom in our family on the day of Hoshana Rabbah. We go from the prayer service straight to the deli, and we then go to the sukkah and we have this delicious meal. So Chaim Goldberg, he comes that morning to the house, and he's excited, and he sits down with me and we schmooze for a while and we speak about his dad, and it's all very beautiful. And then I said to him, can I offer you a drink? He says, sure. So I offered him a drink, took a drink. Then I said to him, you said your wife is with you. He says, yes, she's in the car. I said, tell her to come in. Bevakasha, she should come in. I said, let me give her a drink. He says, no, she's very particular in what she drinks. She only drinks Diet Dr. Pepper Cherry. I said, as it happens, that's my favorite drink. And I had upstairs, this is the reality. I had a fridge in my room full of Diet Dr. Pepper Cherry. He was so excited. He calls her in. She's drinking her Diet Dr. Pepper Cherry, and we're having a great time. Then I said, look, I want to tell you, today is like a miniature holiday. We just bought an obscene amount of cold cuts. Would you like to have like a big, delicious Jewish pastrami sandwich on rye? And he says, no, we got to go. We're actually driving to Florida. I said, tonight was a holiday, but they're not religious people. He was just going to drive. So I thought, you know what? Let him have at least something in the sukkah. So he says, I said, come, have some pastrami. And he says, no, it's okay. We gotta go. And his wife says, I would love some pastrami on rye. He goes, oh, okay. So we make a nice big sandwich and we spend another hour in the sukkah, schmoozing and eating pastrami and salami. Then I said, I live in Muncie, New York, and I know some of the other people who enjoy art and enjoy your dad. I think they would love to meet you. Would you like to meet them? He said, sure. So I set up a few appointments for him, and it was very nice for him. And then he came back at the end to say goodbye to me. And I thought to myself, wouldn't it be nice if he stayed at least for the beginning of the Sukkot holiday, the last 2 days of the holiday? So I said to him, you know what? It's almost sundown. Why don't you stay? We're about to eat a holiday meal. It's going to have challah. It's going to have gefilte fish. We're going to have the horseradish on top as much as you want. We're going to have chicken soup. We're going to have, brisket. So he says, no, we got to go. We're on our way. And she says, brisket? Gefilte fish? I would love to. He goes, oh, okay. So he stays. And I'm like, this contest in my mind, how long can I get Shalom Goldberg to stay at my house? So he is staying, and I had a bunch of students there, and I gave him the proper covet, as they say, give him the proper honor. This is the guy whose father is this big famous artist in museums, and in the middle of the meal, we just began to dance, and it was like so wonderful. It was so, the whole ambiance was something that he couldn't believe. And you know what he said to me? He said to me, you know what? The shtetl isn't dead. Now, he's not a religious fellow, and everything he sort of knew about Judaism came from the images of his father's paintings. But here he was in Muncie, New York, of all places, eating gefilte fish, dipping his challah into honey, and dancing. The shtetl isn't dead. I said, no, it's not. It's alive and kicking. So then he's, okay, we got to go. I said, 1 second. Dessert and some tea. He goes, no, we got to go. She says, some tea? You said tea? I'd love to stay for tea. I said, okay. So then they stayed for another while. So now it's already pretty late. He said, we got to get on the road. I said, you can go, but I'm going to tell you something. It's pretty late. We have a beautiful guest room. You're welcome to stay. Tomorrow is Simchas Torah. It's the wonderful holiday where we dance around the Torah, and you're going to love it. But why don't you just stay? Because you could sleep and you could leave in the morning. No, we got to go. And then she gives this big yawn, like, a nice pillow and blanket sound good. So poor guy, Shalom Goldberg. So there you go. So he ended up sleeping at my house. So he's sleeping, and the next day, so we have a little minion in the house, and we're doing services, and he's sleeping in his room, and we're like more than halfway through the services, and then I realized something. I realized that today we recite Yizkor. Now, for those that don't know, Yizkor is the prayer that we recite for those who have passed away, and I thought, wow, you know what? He is here. He's probably not been in a synagogue maybe ever, but certainly not for a long time. And we were speaking about his dad. And today's Yizkor, how special would it be for him to say Yizkor for his dad? So I knock on his door, and I said, Shalom, I don't know if you're awake or not. It was pretty late at that point, it's like close to 11 o'clock. I said, but we're about to recite Yizkor. Would you like to say Yizkor for the famous Heim Goldberg, your father? So he says, okay, Rabbi, yeah, I definitely do. Can you wait a moment? I said, sure. So we waited about 5 minutes. He comes out. He says, do you have a tallis? I said, yeah, we always have extra tallis. And he takes the tallis, he covers his head, and he begins to cry. He gets very emotional. He says, I can't believe I am here. Yizker, Simchas Torah. I said to him, Shalom, my newfound friend, I want to show you something you probably didn't notice. And I brought him to our entranceway, the entrance, the foyer of our house, which is where we hung the Heim Goldberg painting. And I said, take a good look at that painting. What is it a painting of? And you know what it was a painting of? It was a painting of Simchas Torah in Kazimierz. That's what the painting was. And he hadn't noticed. I said, here you are living in Simchas Torah. So I'm going to show you for a moment a picture of Chaim Goldberg. I'm going to show you also a picture of that painting. I'm sorry if you're on Facebook, you can't see it, but you could Google it. And here we go. Could you guys see that? How do I move this? Oh, there we go. And here is, how do I move that? Could you see him? Yeah, you can see that. That's Chaim Goldberg in his older age. And this is the painting that we owned. And you see, can you guys see this? I can never see. Can you see that? This is Kazimierz. You see people holding flags, the little child holding the flag, everyone holding Simchas Torah, clapping. And this was the painting that I had of his father's. And that was a very, very special painting. I'm going to tell you one more story, but let me first stop this share. I think this is a very special way to end. And then we have another story for next week where we're going to get a little bit into the investment side along with a little more history. But here's going to be my last story for today. The great struggle to connect to Judaism can be facilitated through art. As a matter of fact, in my home, the great motivation that I had for hanging these images was I wanted people to come and, number one, say, wow, I'm in a Jewish house. No ifs, ands, or buts. It's like, bam, right when you come in. And as a matter of fact, right when you come in my house, a big menorah, like life-size menorah, huge. So that's number one. Beautiful art, beautiful imagery. And art can get us to do beautiful things because we want to live up to the calling of that art. Give me 1 second, please. There we go. Door got open and it's winter, so when we have art, we should use it for good. However, like anything, things can be used for good and can be used for bad. There's even something today known as deviant art. That's not good stuff, right? When your art is known as deviant art, there's something not okay, not kosher, as we say. So here's a beautiful, beautiful story. When a person collects art, it's a little bit of a bug, and it's a bug that you know, it could be an expensive bug, but the truth of the matter is, as a Jewish person looking for Metzia feels even better. So we're not in the business. Most of us don't have big bucks to drop. So what we do is we have an eagle eye, we educate ourselves, and opportunities come up all the time, especially today with the internet and auctions. One can find very interesting buys. When I lived in Los Angeles, so there were a number of Jewish thrift stores, the Jewish Federation thrift store, a lot of different Jewish thrift stores. And they very often had bags left in their, in the back where they would sort through, and there was clothing there, and there were other items. And very often people would leave art that either belonged to their great aunt, or someone cleared out a house, or cleared out a storage container. And the Jewish thrift store would do something nice with it. They would sell it, and then they would give it to whatever Jewish cause they wanted to. but you were able to sometimes find Jewish art in Jewish thrift stores. And that's an interesting way of going about it. One day I'm in LA and I just had a yin. I'm going to go into a thrift store. I'm going to hopefully find something. I looked around. There was nothing. Most of the time, there's nothing actually. But you never know. You don't know until you check. And I'm about to leave and I see that there are two etchings by an artist by the name of William Hogarth. Now, William Hogarth was an American painter, not Jewish. And one of the etchings that were framed, sitting there in the corner, probably for a long time because etchings don't really go anywhere, was just of like a scenery. And the other William Hogarth was a image of Basia, the daughter of Pharaoh, presenting Moses, or being presented the baby Moses. Now, this is what I spoke about before. Biblical art, is that Jewish, isn't it? But at that point, I was a little bit on the, I would like to just end, I would just like to leave here with a Jewish piece. So I came to the counter with the painting of Moses in the basket. And I said, how much for this Hogarth? And they said $35. And I said 30, because you were able to bargain in LA. And they said, okay, $30. I got it. Come home. And one of the kids noticed that in the back of the painting, it's appealing, and it looked like there was something there. Now, it used to be that sometimes people who had valuable art, they would hide it behind not valuable art, and that's how they hid their investments. So you never know, someone found actually one of the original copies of the Declaration of Independence behind a poster of paint. It's a very well-known story. So I thought, wow, maybe I have one of those stories going on here. So I take, I gently lift it off and I look, and there behind this William Hogarth print, I have to show you, keep you in suspense one moment. This is what the Hogarth print looked like, just so you could have a visual. Here's a visual of William Hogarth. No, that's not it. No, we will get to her next week. Okay, it was somewhere. Okay, somewhere. I had a nice visual of what it was, but we're gonna ignore that for now. We're gonna go back here. What was behind? Now that I kept you in suspense, what was behind this etching was a map that was 400 years old, a beautiful hand-drawn map. Now, I have no idea what this thing is worth. It's a piece of art. Maybe it's a treasure map, right? That's the first thing we think about today, treasure map. But one thing I knew, I had a regret. And the regret was that I left the other etching in the store, because if this one had a map, who knows what's behind the other etching? I was thinking, should I go back? Now, at that time, I was a rabbi in UCLA, and the thrift store was in Fairfax. And it was a long it was a long drive to go back and forth, and it was too close to Shabbat. So my kid said, are you going to try to make it? And I said, no. If art begins to become a priority and it takes over what should be a priority like Shabbat, then you got to stop. I said, no, we're not going to think about it. I know I left another one there, and I know someone else could take it, but Shabbat. And throughout Shabbat, my kids turned to me and they said, Dad, are you thinking about? I said, no, not thinking about it. Now, maybe once or twice I did, but I really, no, whatever's there, God wants me to have it. I got this, that's it. And by the time I made Havdalah, it was like it in the recesses of the back of my mind, like not important, nothing. Till Sunday. And then Sunday rolls around, and I tell my kids, you know what? Let's buy that other piece and let's see what's what. Maybe it's gone. Who knows? I went back and I bought that piece. And I'm going to keep you in suspense one more moment. Someone's knocking, and then I want to tell you what happened. Sorry, everyone. Suspense is good for the soul. So I went and I saw that piece was still there. So I breathed a sigh of relief. Okay, it's still there. Baruch Hashem. I brought it to the counter. They said, how much? They said, $35. I said, done. No negotiating. I brought it to the car. We took off the back. Do you think there was anything there, anything worth worrying about over Shabbat? Anything to jeopardize keeping Shabbat? What do you think, Olivia? Was there anything in the back of the second Hogarth? This back of the second Hogarth was an incredibly important painting, much, much more valuable than the first. It was one of the primary pieces of an artist by the name of Margaret Burroughs, who is perhaps the most important female African-American artist in American history. And it wasn't just a painting, but it was a painting of plantation workers, which is like the number one African-American subject. So I'm going to just pull up so you can see. I think I pulled it up for a moment ago, but you could see what this lady looked like here. This is Margaret Burroughs. Can you see her? This was her. Oh, this is the Hogarth. This is actually the one where the baby is being presented to Pharaoh. And this is Margaret Burroughs. And I ended up with that piece. Galleries found out about it. They offered me very, very nice sum. And Baruch Hashem. And I really learned from there that, if you keep Shabbos, Shabbos is going to keep you. So if I would have been worried, if I would have been concerned, what would that have done? Ruin my Shabbos, right? So as great as art is and as enjoyable as it could be and as symbolic as it is, it's no replacement for real life. And I think that was the great tragedy of Chaim Goldberg, because Chaim Goldberg's dad in Kazimierz was an observant Jew, and he did know what Shabbat and Pesach and Purim and Hanukkah, and what Saul Silverman did was he replaced for little Chaim Goldberg a way of life with a depiction of a way of life. And what ended up happening with his son was his son had bare memories of what it looked like a long time ago in the shtetl, not realizing that it's not a memory of yesteryear, but it's a dynamic and energetic and spiritual organism that continues to grow and spread and inspire. So those were two stories, one of Chaim Goldberg and one of the William Hogarth that had behind it the Margaret Burroughs. There's more next week. I hope you all enjoyed, and I'm going to wish you a beautiful week, a safe Shabbat, a warm Shabbat, and thank you all for watching.
I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
Well, I want to know if you are familiar with the book. Do you know Potok's Asher Lev?
Yeah, of course.
It's the same story.
Yeah.
It's pretty much the fictional version of that. But the next generation, he gives the son back to the Rebbe. Right. So what happened? My question then is, what happens to Chaim Goldberg's son?
Okay. Well, I spoke to him yesterday. we're still in touch.
If he follows the story, he should become a rabbi.
Well, yeah, he knows the story. He's very, very intent on making sure the world doesn't forget his father. That's where he's up to, and he's published many books. And but there's definitely, he says Baruch Hashem now, and like throws the Yiddishisms around, and I feel like we did tap into something special, and I'm happy because let him know that we're not just alive and kicking, but we are in color. We're not in black and white. Anyways, I love you all. I hope you have a great Shabbos, and stay safe.
Thank you, Rabbi.
You're welcome. Take care.